All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Conservation Planning for Landowners webinar series. This is the fourth session of a four-part series. Tonight we will be talking about forest land and wildlife. This webinar series is hosted by Belknap County Conservation District and Prescott Farms. And there are a number of other partners that have helped make this webinar series possible. So just some webinar information before we get started. The session is being recorded. Participants will be muted for the length of the webinar, and your video is optional. You can submit questions in the chat box feature throughout the presentation, and there will also be time at the end for questions and discussion. If you have any technical difficulties, you can privately chat me, the host, and I'll try to talk you through the issue that you're having. And with that, I will turn it over to the chair of Belknap County Conservation District, Donna Hepp. I think Donna, I think you're muted. Donna there.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Start over.
It was really brilliant. I'm sorry you missed it. So, hi, I'm Donna Hepp. I'm the chair for the board for Belknap County Conservation District, and we're really proud to have you join us tonight. Next year, we're going to be celebrating the 75th year of conservation districts here in New Hampshire. So it's exciting to see, you know, what we've accomplished over the years, and due to the pandemic, we're learning a lot about doing things online, and so we're really pleased that since we can't meet in person, we can talk about these issues with you tonight, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation. So thank you for joining us. Belknap County Conservation District focuses on soil and water conservation and conservation and farms and natural resources. So thank you for joining us tonight.
We have two guest presenters this evening. We have Rebecca DiGirolamo. We also have Kelly Boland. So I will first turn it over to Rebecca, and I'll let you share your screen. We'll stop share.
Is that working?
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Rebecca DiGirolamo, and I'm the Stratford County Forester, but I also cover Belknap County. And I don't know how many of you know what county foresters do, but I work for UNH Cooperative Extension. And a big part of my job is to work with private landowners and towns and conservation organizations to help them getting started and thinking about forest stewardship on their properties. And a lot of times this involves meeting landowners on their land, taking a walk with them, talking them through the different objectives that they might have for their property and helping them develop management options. And then we also work to connect them with natural resource professionals that can help them reach their goals, and sometimes there's funding opportunities that are also available. So I was asked to talk about just the basics of forest management planning. So I was going to kind of walk you through that process from the perspective of a private landowner. But some of that, I think some folks here are from conservation commissions, and a lot of this would also apply to conservation lands. Technical difficulties. Oh, there we go. Okay. I thought I'd start off by just giving a little bit of perspective. So forest land in New Hampshire covers about 4.8 million acres, and that's 83% of our land base. And of that 4.8 million acres, 73% of the forest land is in private ownership, and about 52%, or 2.5 million acres, of that land is in non-industrial private land ownership. So that's landowners just like you and me own more than half of the forest resource in the state of New Hampshire, which is really pretty significant, and the decisions that we make impact a lot of different resources. So what is forest stewardship? I think a lot of us have different ideas of what that might be. I tend to think about it being like forming a connection with the land and managing our resources in a way that's appropriate for the capacity of the site. So managing our resources in a way that's appropriate for the soils and the water resources on the property, and making decisions that, management decisions that will leave the land better than we found it, and taking an adaptive approach to management. We own forest land for all different reasons. These are some of the most common reasons for landowners that we encounter. A lot of people are really interested in managing for wildlife habitat. I think we've been seeing a lot more, especially with the pandemic, of people connecting to land just for their own well-being and the scenic beauty. Also for recreation, whether it's trails or hunting and fishing, to protect water quality, and also for periodic income. A lot of our forest land is able to stay in forest ownership because people are able to generate some periodic income from it through sustainable forest management, which allows them to pay their taxes and to pay other maintenance and management costs that are associated with owning forest land. And it's kind of important when you're starting to think about managing your land to really figure out what your objectives are, and remembering that your objectives might change over time as you learn more about your property. So a lot of people that we work with kind of don't know where to get started. They may have just bought a property or inherited forest land, and they're just starting to think about managing it and trying to figure out how to get started and figuring out what their objectives are. And one thing I always recommend is figuring out where your property boundaries are, whether it's private land or town-owned land, knowing where your property boundaries are so that you can sort of get to know your property better. Depending on the size of your woodlot, when you purchased it, there may have been a survey with it. If you don't know where your property boundaries are, licensed foresters can help you remark property boundaries or help you do the deed research to figure out where they are. If your property has never had its boundaries marked, you would need to work with a licensed surveyor to have your property boundaries marked. One of the reasons that it's so important to know where your property boundaries are is to prevent your neighbors or abutters from timber trespass, and also to prevent yourself from potentially cutting over your property boundary. And as you get to know the boundaries of your property, you'll also get to know the resources that are on your land and the adjacent parcels. Particularly if you're interested in managing for wildlife habitat, it's really helpful to look at your land within that landscape setting and see what other resources are on adjacent and nearby parcels. And it can also be really helpful to map your property. Doesn't need to be anything fancy, just a general, really basic hand-drawn map can help you get to know what resources are out there. If you've got trails or roads on the property, if there are places that are really special to you, you may have some old apple trees that you found out in the back of your property and you want to open up around those to release them for wildlife habitat. You might have found some invasive plants growing along your field edges and you want to monitor those and make sure that they don't expand into your woodlot.
Rebecca, I'm sorry, you're cutting out. Your microphone is not steady and you're cutting out.
It might be my internet connection. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
That sounds better.
Sorry, that occasionally happens. I apologize. Anyway, so mapping your property is a really great way to get to know the resources on it and the resources on the surrounding land. And it's a really good way to really kind of focus on what you want to get from your property and through your management actions. And once you have a good idea of, where your property boundaries are, what resources are on your property, learning how to identify the plants and the wildlife that you're seeing on your property. UNH Cooperative Extension has tons of resources on our website to help you learn about both native plants and invasive plants. and also different methods for controlling invasive plants, different wildlife habitat features that might be on your property. And it's also important if you have family members that are involved with the management of your property, maybe you have children that might inherit the property, or you co-own the property with someone else, to make sure that everybody is at the table when you're thinking about different management options. And then there are a number of natural resource professionals that are available to walk your property with you, including your county foresters. There's a county forester in every county in New Hampshire. And there's also wildlife biologists and consulting foresters that can help you kind of walk you through different options. We also, if you're a new landowner and you're interested in kind of formalizing your objectives for your property, we have some helpful handouts on our website that can kind of help you prioritize your management options and help you think about questions that might sort of help you think a little bit more about the future and what you might want to use your property for. But so typically as a next step, if you've decided that you want to do some management on your property, it's good to have a written plan that can help guide your management actions. And so in the state of New Hampshire, anyone who's providing forestry services for compensation has to be licensed. We have a directory of licensed foresters that's available online. There's 300 licensed foresters, or over 300 licensed foresters in the state. And they provide a lot of different services for private landowners, one of which is writing forest management plans. And a forest management plan, if you're not familiar, is basically, it's a working guide that has recommendations that are based on not only your objectives for the property, but the documented resources that are on your property. So typically a management plan would include a number of different maps. The forester that you would work with would go out and inventory your forest. They would map out the different forest stands, which are basically assemblages of similar tree species of a similar age class with similar site conditions. And then they would make recommendations for each of those stands. So management recommendations that are specific to your objectives for the property. They're also going to document all the wildlife habitat resources, all the recreational resources, if you have trails on your property, wetland resources, and the soils on your property as well. It's really a detailed inventory that helps you understand what's on your property and guides your management. And then they're going to make a series of recommendations with a timeline. And it's basically a document that you can continue to refer to over time that will help kind of guide you each year in figuring out what you need to do. So if there's a planned timber harvest, if you need to do some invasive plant control, everything will kind of be spelled out in there for you. And it's a document that you can reference and keep up to date over time. If you're thinking about implementing a timber harvest, it's important to understand the process and seek appropriate professional assistance. So most landowners don't have a good understanding of the timber markets and the laws and regulations that apply to forest management. So it can be really helpful to work with a professional consulting forester to kind of guide you through that process and oversee the timber harvest. And we typically recommend that landowners do that. The forester is going to be managing that timber sale on your behalf, so they're going to be looking out for your interests. They're going to lay out the skid roads, the stream crossings, and landings. They'll make sure that all of the proper wetlands permitting is taken care of if you have any stream or wetland crossings. They'll also mark the trees that are going to be cut. So before the timber harvest is implemented, you can go out and walk your property and see what it's going to look like, and it will give you an idea of how your property is going to change from that timber harvest. They're also going to negotiate prices with a logging contractor or put the timber harvest out to bid for you. They'll prepare a written contract for you between you and the buyer. If you're going to sell timber in the state of New Hampshire, a written contract is necessary. It will clearly define the parameters of the sale, but it's also required by law. So if you are selling any forest products that are subject to an intent to cut or to the town timber tax, you have to have a written contract, and foresters are very skilled at writing those. And we also have some timber sale contracts templates that are available. And then they'll supervise the logging operation, ensure that there's compliance with all the laws and regulations. They'll make sure that you're properly paid for the wood harvested and handle all the necessary paperwork and make sure that the timber sale is closed out properly, that there are no erosion issues, and that any areas that have had issues, if you need some water bars installed or your landing seeded and mulched, we'll make sure that all of that is taken care of. And there are a number of forestry laws to be aware of if you're considering a timber sale on your property. So if you are harvesting more than 10,000 board feet or 20 cords for personal use, you need to file for timber tax. That's a municipal tax. So in New Hampshire, your property tax does not include your timber. It just includes the land and the buildings on it. And so your timber is taxed at the time that it's cut. So you would file a notice of intent to cut before your timber harvest. And if you're working with a forester, they'll help you fill that out. That gets filed with the town, and that's just an estimate of the volume that's going to be removed. And then when your timber harvest is complete, you submit a report of the wood cut, and that is the volume that you are taxed on. The landowner pays that tax to the town. We also have a number of other laws, and I won't get into too much details about it, but that apply to timber harvesting. There's a basal area law that basically restricts the number of trees, the sort of density of trees that can be removed along public roadways and bodies of water. And that's really to prevent erosion issues, to provide wildlife habitat, protect stream temperature and aquatic life. And so no more than 50% of the basal area, which is a measure of the density of trees, can be harvested within a given year in those areas. We also have slash laws in New Hampshire, which have to do with the debris that's left after a timber harvest. So the branches and leaves and stems from the tops of trees or unmerchantable logs that are left behind. There are restrictions on sort of how close that material can be to property lines and structures. It has to do with fire safety issues and appearance. And then there are a number of wetland and surface water regulations to protect the water resources in the state. And so if you have any stream crossings or wetland crossings, there are permits that need to be filed with the Department of Environmental Services. And just some other considerations if you're an owner of forest land. If you're not familiar with the current use program, this is an assessing and taxing method that essentially allows owners of forest land, if you have more than 10 acres of forest land, and that's 10 acres beyond the improved area. So it doesn't include like your driveway or your house or the improved area around your house. But if you have 10 acres or more of forest land, you can qualify for a lower tax rate through the current use program. And there are two rates for that. One is just the forest land rate, and then there's also another rate if you have documented stewardship. So if you have a forest management plan for your property, you can qualify for that lower rate. And there's also a recreational adjustment if you allow certain types of recreation on your property that you can qualify for that will further reduce your property tax rate. And so, current use does make it more affordable to own forest land. However, it's not a permanent protection for your property. So if their land in the current use program can come out of that program, if somebody changes the use of that land, they pay a change of use tax. And so that land can potentially be developed. But you know, while you own it and it is in a forested use, it does have some tax savings. And if you're thinking about, you know, permanent protection of your forest land, I think you talked about conservation easements at an earlier webinar. So there are lots of, there are other conservation tools for permanent protection of forest land. And there's also financial assistance for certain forest management practices. So if you're thinking about doing a timber harvest and you don't have a forest management plan for your property, which I really recommend you have, there may potentially be cost share funding through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, who Kelly works for forest management funds to cover forest management planning. New Hampshire Fish and Game has a small grants program that can also help cover that cost. And then there's a variety of funding sources for things like timber stand improvement, which may not be a commercial activity, but will improve the future value of the timber on your property. Invasive plant control, lots of different wildlife habitat practices where there's potential cost share funding through those programs. There's application processes for those programs that you would need to go through to see if you qualify for them, but they can be really useful resources for landowners. And again, that's just sort of an introduction to the process of forest management if you're thinking about doing a timber harvest. And a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of some of the laws and regulations that apply to that. But if you have questions, whether you own private land or if you're working with a town on the Conservation Commission, your county foresters are always available as resources for you, even over the phone, or to come out and take a woodlot walk with you and look at specific options that are based on the resources on your property.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. I don't currently see any questions in the chat box, but we also have time at the end for questions. If you have any questions for Rebecca, we can move on to Kelly.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. Hi, I'm Kelly Boland. I'm the state biologist for the NRCS in New Hampshire. I work a lot with cooperative extension, people like Rebecca who go out on people's land and walk and talk about the forest resource. But Nels and I work together. Nels is the district conservationist in Belknap in Carroll County, and we can assist you with those site visits for if you're thinking about getting a forest management plan. Or we also offer things like wildlife management plans, which can sometimes fit a little better for certain types of land and landowners, depending on your goals. So I'm just going to start a presentation, but I would, I love the back and forth. So if anybody wants to chime in, Nels, of course, if anybody has questions while we're going on, I'm happy to answer them. Just put them in the chat or take your mic off and give me a shout. So I'll keep it pretty casual. I was asked to talk about general wildlife, and so that's what I'll do. If you have specific things you really want to hear about, we can dig into it a little bit. I know we don't have a ton of time tonight. So let me get my slideshow. Let me see how to share this guy with you. Take me a second. I think it's this one. Share. All right, and let me know if you see it. Somebody say nod or thumbs up. I like the thumbs up. I like the nods. I can see your faces still, which is good. Okay, I'm going to do the thing where I make it actually a slideshow. There we go. So Rebecca talked a bit about boundary lines, and who doesn't care about boundary lines? Wildlife. So I was thinking about that while Rebecca was talking. We definitely have a lot of different wildlife species that are priorities in the state, and whatever you might have, we might be promoting a certain species or a certain habitat type at 1 year to the next. 1 year fish are hot and the next year turtles are hot, but you have to make your own goals for your own land. Like what do you want to help? What do you want to see? You might have a small piece of land that can support, maybe you can do something for pollinators on that piece of land, but you're probably not going to be able to do a whole lot for black bear, just based on what you have to work with. But you can provide some habitat components on your land no matter what size of property you have. So are you seeing just my slideshow, or are you also seeing your faces like I see?
We're seeing just your slideshow.
Okay, because your faces are blocking part of my slideshow. I wanted to make sure I wasn't blocking that. Okay, great, thank you. So, how do we prioritize, at least the agencies, like I work for Natural Resources Conservation Service. We really try to look at state and federally listed species to try to figure out, okay, what are we going to focus our efforts on? But we're also looking at the Wildlife Action Plan that comes out of New Hampshire Fish and Game. And these can be a really good tool. The Wildlife Action Plan is an excellent tool to look at what types of wildlife are priorities in the state, but also what can you do? It lists out the habitat types associated with many of the species, threats to those species, and then actions that can be taken to help those species. So, pictured here, state and federally listed, we have the northern long-eared bat over here on the left, definitely a species that has drastically declined over the past actually like less than 10 years due to white nose syndrome. And this is uses our forest systems. Really important time of year for this bat is June and July, when they have their pups with them, and those pups can't fly. So we have, we consider what time of year we're cutting in case those bats are out there. We have hognose snakes. I know not everybody loves the snakes, so I won't talk about them too much, but I would love to have a session just on snakes sometime if people know it's coming. Wildlife Action Plan and priorities. New England cottontail up here is one of our working lands for wildlife species. Landings turtle over here, also one of our working lands for wildlife species. It's one that NRCS is specifically focusing on. And then I think this is yellow-banded bumblebee, which is a priority bee species that's actually found up in the Belknap area, and is, uses old fields and is declined quite a bit. So there's priority bees, there's priority turtles, mammals, herps, and then of course we have here, we have our eastern brook trout. So not every critter is found everywhere in the state. So when you're thinking about what do I want to do for wildlife, you want to think, what do we have in my area? You can go to the State Wildlife Action Plan and actually find out where there have been records of certain species. So do I have Blanding's turtle up in northern Coos County? Well, they just don't go up there. So you're not going to be able to do really much for that species, but maybe you'll be able to do something for wood turtles, which are found up in the area. And focus priority areas for a lot of these that have been created by agencies like New Hampshire Fish and Game and NRCS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So that's where they spend extra effort improving habitats for these critters. So what is habitat? Composed of three main elements. We have our cover, like vegetation, rocks, burrows, dead trees. It can be even little rock piles. It can be a stem, a hollow stem. That can be cover. Food, vegetation, insects, other animals. Water is key. Every species needs water, whatever form it comes in. Doesn't necessarily need to go to a pond to drink, but they need water somehow. And space is also type of habitat component. It's, how much area does something need to successfully nest or survive? So, how much in-stream flows for fish, how much width, how much flow. Space is really important. So habitat elements can be short supply or non-existent due to landscape, the management, but we can do things to improve this. So, you know, we have all sorts of habitat types in the state. This isn't even all of them. Here's some of our shrubland species, grassland species, streams. I'll touch on a little bit of this. I know I don't have a ton of time today, so I'll try not to harp on any one too much, but if you want to hear more, just let me know. So when you go out on your land, you're going to look and see different height stages. You're going to see different features. Here, you know, you might look and say, oh, it's a big weedy mess. Well, there's forbs here. These forbs are going to be flowering plants for pollinators. Bare ground, that's going to be a nesting site for maybe a turtle, maybe a snake, maybe bees, solitary bees, which do need to burrow into bare ground. So bare ground is really important. And it's a type of habitat biologists are starting to recognize as an important component left undisturbed. Then you get into your grass, your shrubs, and your trees. So we have a bunch of different things going on in this one little snippet of a photo. Another, you know, other than what's going on right there, shape and area are really important to some species, you know. These are both grasslands. The upper left grassland is very long and narrow. Might not matter for, say, if it's full of forbs and pollinators, might go and use that just fine. But for a grassland bird, that upper left photo grassland is not going to do, the birds will not probably choose that to nest in. So it's going to want more of a square shape or an area like the one on the lower right. Why? Because they nest on the ground. They're going to be nesting on the ground. The narrower, the more edge there is, the more predation that happens on their nest. So they're going to want some, you know, very expansive, usually at least 5 acres, and that's kind of on the small side, 5-acre fields. Things like meadowlarks need more like 20, 25. The meadowlark is the lower left bird. So one thing you can do in an open field is mow outside of the nesting season. You know, the nesting season generally runs from late May to early August. So if those birds can get on, have young, and those young can fly away, then you've protected that land, but also been able to do your other management goals out there. Here's another look at a grassland. Now, you have this really low grass area over on the left side of the photo. That might be a good place for a northern harrier to hunt, or a roosting area for something like a woodcock to sit in at night and be able to see around it and make sure no predators are going to come and take a bite out of it. They like to be able to see. The area on the right might be more that where the blue arrow is. Can anybody tell me what they think that's pointing at? Or maybe I should just answer. I think that's milkweed. So you can look at these, you know, look at the area that they didn't mow and look at the area that they did and see what grew. You're going to be able to provide pollinator habitat here. Probably some monarchs are going to start using this. If you're managing for monarchs, this is, you know, perfectly reasonable thing to do, is to leave parts of your fields unmowed throughout the season and mow late. And when I'm saying mow late, a lot of people think August, that's good. Well, for pollinators like monarchs, you might want to wait until Halloween, because then they're able to complete their life cycle and fly south. And you know, promote areas like this. And then if you want to keep this open, you could mow it after Halloween, or wait till the next spring, or do it every few years. And these taller areas can be good places for turkeys to go find bugs. You know, if you can rotate parts of your land and leave some idle areas, this is really good for a lot of, especially insects. like this. So here's some late season flowers. I saw pollinators were one of the priorities for folks that were interested in this tonight. So I threw a few pollinator slides in here. So what's pollinator habitat? Places that provide food and cover and nesting for pollinators. They need nectar and pollen. Nectar is like carbohydrates, and pollen is the protein. Those are in general terms. So providing those throughout the growing season is important if you want to make some pollinator habitats. They also need, some of them need bare ground for nesting. And the deadwood and pithy stems, those hollow stems like raspberries can have, I'm sure I can think of others, but I can't think of them right now. So just these little strange things that you can do. And you can do a lot of the pollinator stuff on small pieces of land. So I have taken I have a third of an acre in Dover. And when I moved in, it was mowed wall to wall. And I took a little corner out of the yard and I just let it go and to see what's gonna grow there. And there's a lot of late season asters that came in. I planted some Joe Pye weed out there. So now it's providing that habitat. It also has drawn in meadow voles, which, you know, I should have thought about maybe I would put my garden not near that area because the meadow voles did find the garden. So providing flowers throughout the season, but especially early blooms. So these little bees are going under, you know, hanging out over the winter and coming out early, the queens needing to find food immediately. So some early blooms are willows. Red maple is actually an important early blooming tree. I think we think about these little young meadows and open fields, but forests can provide some resources as well. Mow the fields late, leave refugia. You know, leave places that you just don't do anything to, weedy edges, and then make some habitat diversity. And yeah, some people choose to put in nest blocks for bees and things. These can be tough because they need to be cleaned out a lot. So I've seen them promoted, but I'd say, you know, if you're not going to be able to clean it out, they can transmit diseases. So you've got to be careful about how much effort you put into those. Excuse me. So yeah, just providing seasonal forage. That's what that slide's about. Excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. So yeah, red maple, willows, hazelnut, serviceberries. These are early shrubs and trees. So some people jump to creating a pollinator habitat by clearing land like you see in the upper left, buying seed and then seeding it. But this can be very expensive and kind of difficult to achieve unless you are very patient and diligent. So we do offer this as an activity, NRCS does, but sometimes I like to work with nature. What does your land actually want to do? So I think old fields and shrublands make some of the best pollinator habitats as well as bird habitat. That's an eastern towhee in the upper right. You can mow these every 2 to 3 years. That's a mower down there that, I think they're mowing probably a little too early. If I was that manager, I'd probably wait a little bit in the season so that you're not mowing over bird nests, and snakes and turtles might be using that area as well. Mowing half to a third of the field at any time of year is also a good idea. You're leaving those refugia areas. If you can raise your mower deck up a little higher, you might actually be protecting things like bees that might be deep down in those grasses. Maybe mowing over the top of turtle shells too. And I will get to the turtles. So, I've kind of talked about pollinators a bit. Moving on to migratory songbirds a little. Thing is, with wildlife, you're overlapping a lot of, there's not like pollinator management is separate from bird management. You're providing floral resources with highly recommended preferred shrubs for migratory songbirds. And you can see on this list, it talks about the nutrient content of arrowwood, some of the dogwoods. These species are also great for pollinators. I'm going to briefly touch on trout habitat because, it's Belknap County and we love our trout and wood and stream. And we've been focusing on first and second order streams. These are small streams. These are, I'd say, about 10 feet wide, maybe 15, down to like 5 feet wide. These are headwater streams. Brook trout need cold water to survive, highly oxygenated water. Cold water holds oxygen better. And so small streams in the woods are actually being focused on across the state by Trout Unlimited and some of our other partners. Donna's done a lot of work with this, and so has Nels. Nels actually brought this, I think, to the state. So brook trout's a priority for the state as well as NRCS. And it's not just brook trout that's benefiting from work we do on streams. Wood turtles also use these areas, stream salamanders, insects.
Slimy sculpins.
Slimy sculpins. Thanks, Nels. That was next on my list. No, it wasn't. So what we've been doing is an activity called, I don't know, what do we call it? Wood in stream, where we actually cut logs and put them into stream systems to create riffles, glides, cascades, and pools, all which are used by several of these wildlife that use streams, but kind of targeted and built on the brook trout habitat needs. So I won't talk too much more about that because I know we're running out of time. And I can't go through a talk without talking about turtles. So we also have 3 species of priority turtles that NRCS is working on right now. And I actually have a site visit up out of, I don't remember the town it's in, but it's with Deb out of Carroll County. And we're gonna go look at potential for maybe spotted turtles at this site. So the turtle species you see are species of greatest conservation need, or in the case of blandings, it's endangered in the state. Wood, I believe, is just species of greatest conservation need. It's more widespread throughout the state. Blandings is focused in the southeastern part of the state, primarily. And spotted is in the southern half of the state. And wood turtle go all the way up. So they're more ubiquitous throughout the state. Threats to turtles, definitely road mortality, loss of wetland habitats, and water level fluctuations can be risky to them, but there are things we can do to them or for them. We can do land protection through our wetland reserve easement program. We can do nesting site creation, which we have been doing across the state. We've been working with people to identify places that these turtles are nesting and clearing those areas. Also something that needs bare ground, sandy soils. Good best management practices, even in the forest. These are Blandings turtles especially, and spotted, use forested systems quite a bit. Blandings need wetland complexes in forest systems. So land protection, best management practices during forestry operations where blandings are could be, cutting trees just in the winter when they're hibernating. So leaving buffers to vernal pools. So here's just some of the wetland types that they use. Wood turtles are really focused on slow-moving streams and very tied to them. Blandings and spotted turtles use forested wetlands, shrub swamps, emergent wetlands. And then October to April, they're pretty much going in and hibernating under the water. And this is an example of a perfect site that would be great to keep in the open condition for nesting purposes. They nest in June and July, they bury eggs, and those eggs typically hatch in late August, all the way, it could be through the early October, and then the hatchlings will scuttle down to the wetland. So I'll move on just briefly talking about young forest. I'm touching on every habitat type here, so I hope it's not too much, but it's just broad brush. So young forest is definitely lacking in our forests. We have a lot of forests that are, 80 to 100, maybe even 60 to 80 years old in the state. So introducing some diversity to our forest systems has been a priority for state agencies, management agencies. 3 to 5 acre openings, even 1 to 3 acre openings can benefit forest birds like chestnut-sided warblers. Once you create these openings, you can either rotate them around the land, the forest, or you can maintain them with something like a brontosaurus, like you see in the lower right. That's a big piece of equipment, but it all costs money, right? Well, all this big management costs money. And so that's where, maybe NRCS can assist you in your management planning. And then if there's activities built within that plan, we can help fund those activities through our EQIP program. Talk to Nels about that. And then lastly, I'll just touch on, forest. We have got 84% of our state is forested. That metric has changed many times over the time I've been in New Hampshire. But, there's a lot of forest resources out there that are really important for wildlife. And on the left, you see a snag. It's a, pretty much a tree that was girdled so that it would create a dead tree that then something might be able to nest or den in. There are a lot of snags out in the woods already. If you look, so, you can keep an eye out when you're walking your woods, look for these dead and dying trees. They're really positive for a lot of species of wildlife. In the center, I see oak believe, which is a really important mast species. Mast is seed, like an acorn is mast, it's hard mast. It's something a lot of wildlife needs, turkey and deer. They are eating this. This is their food, mast. And then on the right is a photo of a small opening that was created for bats, actually. These small openings are important foraging areas for bats, but it's also going to be an important area for forest birds. So just diversifying the forest. Your forester can help you plan these out. People like Nels, me, and extension folks can walk your property with you and point out these features. But I'd suggest taking a walk and seeing what you have. And yep, so last slide. There are a lot of, the diversity of these are, I'm talking about cavity trees here, snags, den trees. They're going to provide different habitats to different species depending on the size of them. There are a lot of small snags out there. There's not really a big shortage of small diameter snags and dead trees, but there is a shortage of snags and dead trees over 18 inches. So it's not so much creating those, but maintaining those. So when you're doing your forest management plan, one of the objectives, if it's wildlife, could be retain snags. That's a good management objective to have in your forest management plan if this is important to you. So with that, I'm gonna end my wildlife talk. I know it was very diverse and broad, just like the wildlife in New Hampshire. So hopefully I answered a few questions or touched on something each of you care about in your area. But anyway, thanks, Jessica, for having me.
Thanks for presenting. We have a couple of questions, it looks like, in the chat box. We have one from Whitney. Is there anything that can be used to help keep turtle nesting sites, eggs safe from predators or disturbances by people?
Well, we do, one thing, I've worked with people that do turtle nest sites, but a lot of folks want to say, I want to put a sign there. And, trying to position them away from trails, away from heavily used access areas is one good practice. It's tough to keep predators away unless there's a effort for predator control or, fencing. We haven't gone to that, to doing that in our state yet. I know they sometimes do it in other places. Having, one big area can be good, but if you have a few options for turtles on the landscape, you might find that a predator will find nests in one of the areas, but not the other. So providing a couple sites for them can be a way to deter all nest loss. We expect some loss of some of the nests. Turtles actually will dig false nests to trick predators and thinking, wow, oh, that's where the nest is. And then they're like, oh, but I guess some other raccoon got the eggs. But really, they're just trying to trick the predators and actually lay their eggs somewhere else. So, it's tough to protect them fully from predation. If you see a specific area that a turtle actually put a nest in and you want to, put a small fence around it, you can try that. But I don't know that would even prevent, predation.
Great. We have another question from Linda. There is a rare red pine ridge community of 10.5 acres on my property. Of what value is that?
Well, I know things like nighthawks, some other species might use them. I'd have to I don't know, I'm not all that familiar with that community type, but I would say you can give me an email after if you'd like, but go to the State Wildlife Action Plan. It'll probably list some of the species that might be associated with that habitat. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I'd actually be interested to see that too. Some of our red pine ridgetop communities have an interesting fire history associated with them as well. And we don't have a lot of them. They'll often succeed to other species without that influence. I'd be curious to see that.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if we can dig into the action plan, see if it's highlighted as a community and if there's been any recommendations for it.
Great. If anyone else has any questions, you can put them in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask questions.
So Jessica, this is Lisa Moore, and I think I got the right link, although I couldn't open it because it's a large document and I've got a lot going on the computer right now. But I think this is a booklet that outlines how trails can impact wildlife. I don't know, Kelly, maybe you recognize the link, but how trails can impact wildlife. And it just talks about how you can kind of design use of recreational and other uses of your wooded area with wildlife in mind.
That's a good point there. I think it's called Trails for Wildlife and People, maybe. And I think the New Hampshire Fish and Game, I know a few other partners worked on that. Maybe extension too, not sure. But yeah, it's a good, rules of thumb for, because trails can impact wildlife, obviously, especially if they're used a lot. So thanks for bringing that up. I didn't see, I'm not seeing a screen or anything, so I don't know what link that is, but I think if you probably Google it, you could find it, or maybe Jessica you could send it to her and maybe she could share it with this group.
Yes, I can share that link with everyone. Great. Any other questions or comments before we close out the night? Let's see.
Kelly, I had a quick one on, we've put in a couple of woodcock openings that are going to be maintained every 2 or 3 years. What's the best timing for a brontosaurus to go through the openings? One is a little better than an acre and the other is a little less than 3.
I'd say, are you an alder primarily, or are you just in young forest?
It's right now, they were just cut this year, so they're open, but it was mixed conifer and hardwood stand.
I see.
Gun
Okay.
stock.
Once for woodcock, especially once once the understory, so there's that young phase. I think probably every 10-15 years is a good timing for going back and re-entering for woodcock, but definitely during the winter or after November, I would say is the timing wise to avoid. I mean, you would avoid woodcock, but you're avoiding other things too. So, if we can just all nesting is over, most things are hibernating or underground or have flown south. I think that's how I would approach it.
In terms of brush clearing.
Great.
Yeah, I'd like to just say a couple things before. Jess?
Go ahead now.
This was great. I'm sorry that I couldn't have made the other ones. This is the first one I could make, but these are 2 topics that are very interesting to me. And I love, I haven't met Rebecca yet, but I'm glad I finally got to meet you right now. I think you're kind of new and I just got back from detail. So, and everything Kelly said is true and it's all very interesting. And Rebecca said is true and interesting. And I want to strongly promote not only the forest management plans that NRCS can help fund, but also the wildlife management plans. You could actually do both on your property. So if you know of anybody that is interested in their property and they have at least 10 acres or so, then they can talk to me. They can go through Lisa or whoever, and then we'll take a look at the property and sign you up for a forest management plan or a wildlife habitat management plan. And the beauty of these things is once you get these plans in place, then we can also do cost share money in the future to implement some of the recommendations that are made in the plan, so we can have some real good on the ground conservation work that has been described tonight. So come and talk to me somehow.
Thanks, Nels. And thank you, Rebecca and Kelly. Excellent presentations tonight. Conservation planning is something that we're promoting, and I think these talks have provided a good kind of overview and hopefully got some folks getting some new ideas and seeing what kind of resources are available. So thank you very much for the work that you folks do and for sharing your knowledge tonight. And I'm glad to see the participation tonight. And Jess, thank you. And Lisa for all that you do as well for the Conservation District. If you have any questions, I think Jess, if you can just provide some of the resources and contacts for the folks that we're sharing with us tonight, I think that'd be really helpful for the participants, because I think a few of them may have some more questions. So thank you.
Yep, I will send out a follow-up email with emails and links that were shared in the chat. And we also have a survey, a post-evaluation survey of the webinar series. So we would appreciate any and all feedback on the series.
Great. And I'm sure that Jess will include the link for looking at the other presentations. So if you missed one of the 4 presentations this month, they're available to you to take advantage of at your leisure. So thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you, Jess.
Thanks.